Hello and welcome to this week's episode of The Connection Compass. I'm your host, Andrea Louise Evans. This week, I'm joined by Dylan Ayaloo, known as the Inner Work Guy, on a mission to open hearts and awaken minds. Dylan shares his journey of years of deep inner work, the commitment, discipline, and courage it takes to connect with the most authentic version of yourself and find your true voice. We explore the power of showing up for what feels impossible, the lessons that come from building something from nothing, and how inner work can truly transform your life. Together, we talk about resistance, purpose, and belonging, and what it means to navigate the stream of life when it throws us off course, returning again and again to ourselves with an openness and intention. Welcome, Dylan, to the Connection Compass podcast. So pleased that you're here. For our listeners, please could you share a little bit about yourself today?
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here and to share with your listeners. A little bit about myself. I don't know where to start. I think more presently, I'm a yoga teacher of teachers. I've trained yoga teachers now for almost 20 years. I used to have my own studio in South London, and most of my work these days is a combination of yoga, meditation, deep transformational work, and healing, like energy work as well. So there you go. It's a little bit about me to start with.
That's interesting. And I know that you refer to yourself as the inner work guy. So what brought you to the inner work yourself?
So I'm going to have to go a little bit lengthier in the story, if you don't mind.
No, not at all. No, that's what it's about.
I started off, I guess the journey started off at the age of 6 or 7 years old. I was this little kid in North Malaysia. This is where we lived. And I used to get beaten in school because I was the tiniest kid in school. And kids are mean. Or can be, not all of them, right? And the next year we moved to the city and my dad put me into a local martial arts class. And I never expected it. By the age of 12, I had my black belt. By the age of 13, I was, selected for national, and I was training for the Olympics for Malaysia. And that kind of shaped my life quite differently at that time, just as a pro athlete training. And then when I got to the age of 18, much to the delight of my coaches, I quit my team and decided to move to Australia instead and study, go to uni instead, because I just realized that in what was at that time like a third world country, there was just not, it's not like here. If you're in the Olympics, you get sponsored. It's just a different life, basically. You don't really get much for that.
Yeah.
So I wanted to use my brain and went to uni, and of all things, I studied a computing science degree, got into tech back then, and, worked in corporate Australia for many years. And then around that time, a lot of my inner work journey started, because as I moved to Australia, I started, there was stuff going on with my family, between my mom and dad. And by the age of 18, I had all these questions in my mind, and things just seems like a lot didn't make sense to me about life. And I used to kind of think that I just thought everyone would be thinking about these questions. But I started asking myself questions like, why am I here? And who am I? And what am I here to do? And what is this life about? Is it just kind of study and get a job and try and make as much money as you can and have a family and, I don't know, eventually die? That seems to be what I'm seeing around me, what does it all mean? And soon after, as I got into corporate, I discovered this thing called stress, and my face would break out, and I didn't know why and what was going on. And I started exploring meditation classes. There's a local Buddhism meditation. I'm not Buddhist, but I went to a Buddhism meditation class. It was really unique. She, the person teaching it, she was a 21-year-old nun, Buddhist nun, and she was extremely wise. And I used to just go and sit there and take notes, and we'd, do 2 or 3 meditations every week in the sessions. And around about that time, I started thinking about this thing called yoga. And I had no experience of yoga. I didn't, come across it at all. There's just this, somehow, I guess, a voice inside of me that was just I was curious about this thing called yoga, and it wasn't popular. It was just this weird thing back then. So it kind of started off, with my transformation work, my yoga meditation. And then some years later, when I moved to London, when I left corporate Australia and moved to London to build my studio, then I started to meet some of my teachers, my yoga teachers, and they started bringing some elements of transformation work in the programs that I did. And then I started training with organizations here in London. And then I started to seek out different teachers and masters and, go after that. And I'm quite obsessive like that. I'll just put myself into something for, a decade if I need to and spend the money and time and learn the thing. So at the beginning, it was, to heal my journey with my dad. And, when I moved to London, and then it just continued from there. And, I couldn't stop. And I started to get really curious about facilitating it. So I learned to become a facilitator and hold people's processes and started bringing that in my, the trainings that I was delivering, definitely our yoga teach trainings. And then, later on, I started to launch non-yoga programs, like purely transformational programs. So there you go. That's
Wow.
the whole timeline.
Yeah, so I'm going to take you back a little bit, if that's okay. So I want to talk to you about your corporate experience and the feeling, that the stress that came with it. So can you remember what that felt like, being in that environment, and comparing it to now, to what it felt like when you started to open your yoga studios? Can you remember those feelings about what that felt like?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So at that time, I was in uni, and I came from a country that my passport was red. So, and I was used to basically anywhere I went, I would just always get pulled up at the airport
Okay.
because I looked different. I was brown and I had a red passport. So, there's always a conversation. So I never really thought of it as like, oh wow, this is being done onto me. I just thought like, okay, I guess, they just need some information. And I started to just not answer. And I realized that they were the kind of the same kind of questions, right? Like, so when I moved to Australia, I had this idea that at some point, because of the stuff that was going on with my mum and dad, I wanted to build a life in Australia and move my mom over, from there. But it was almost impossible for me to live in a country like Australia because it was, kind of first world, and I was coming from what was like a third world. But what I did have was an extreme amount of discipline that my sport taught me because it was just trained into me as a pro athlete, and focus and perseverance and determination. So while I was in uni, I just, by the second year, I had this thought like, oh, actually, maybe I'd like to live here. And then I started to learn how difficult it was going to be. And I was like, I have to find a way to, because my mom, my family it's going to shape them. So in my third year of my uni, there was an opportunity for me to do work experience, which I jumped at because that was my ticket into, getting out of my student visa into some kind of a
Mhm.
working type situation, which was allowed. And in that year, I was working and studying, and I managed to kind of extend that year to more than a year. Once I got into the job, I was just working harder than anyone else around me. And so I was working and studying. So, it's quite normal for me to I'd get up, go to uni, and then go and work, or go to work and then go to a class, in uni, come back to work, there were many nights I would stay at work and just work until very late and then go home, sleep. Like I would
Yeah.
just go harder than anyone else basically with my work and study because I just had this idea that, okay, I'm going to find a way to actually live here because I need to. And I did. So at that time, the stress thing, I never knew stress. So I don't know how, but somehow I didn't know about stress. So when I got there, my face started to break out. I'm like, well, shit, what's going on? There was a naturopath nearby my house. I went to see them and they're like, oh, you're stressed. You need to kind of change what you're eating. And I was like, okay, how does that affect what's going on in my face? I didn't really understand any of that. Yeah. So it was a catalyst. And my time in corporate, how does it compare to me starting a yoga studio? It was so easy. It was so good because I didn't have to carry the weight of the business. You know what I mean? Like, good turn up, do the job. I'm not responsible for more than what my role was. I would get paid every month. Unlike when you build a business and the uncertainties of running a business and being responsible for that and a community and basically just all of the things that came with it. Running business is hard. It's not for everyone.
Yeah, yeah, and that there's a complete change in your face as well, the whole energy of your face when you're talking about that experience, and then you came to London and you saw me shit, it's like, "Oh, just easy. It's just like like a sigh of relief, like, oh, thanks.
I was just ignorant. I had no idea. I was like, yeah, let's move across the world, and don't know anyone there. Let's start a business, start from zero. Yeah, I'll do it
Yeah,
somehow.
yeah. That's incredible, really, that you've done it twice, that you've set up home in two countries. That's amazing. It's
Thank you.
incredible resilience. So from doing the inner work, has that transformed your life?
Hmm. I think at that time when I got into it, when I moved to London, I just moved my mom to Australia and set her up. She was, we were there for a few years already, so she was good. And, I had a chat with her and I was like, I just had this idea this dream that I wanted to go to London. This voice inside, something stirring inside of me. And she was like, you need to go and do it. So when I moved to London, and I had this idea of starting a yoga studio with zero business experience, I started delving into, well, I went and trained with one of my teachers, Baron Baptiste in America. And, he quickly kind of took me under his wing and on his team. And I started to do more work with him and that community for some time. And there was some very light touch, transformational work there. And then I was recommended to come and train. There's an organization here in London that I train with. And some of the first things that came up was, my relationship with my dad. Because when I took my mom away, after I sorted out whatever needed to be sorted out, I actually stopped talking to my dad for a few years. I think it's like 5 years that I stopped talking to him. And in that time, he got very ill and I didn't know about it. He got really sick and almost lost his life at that time. And because I wasn't talking to him, at that time, I just shut him out, basically. And when I started to work on myself, the thing that kept coming to me was, call your dad. It wasn't someone saying it to me. It was just, again, some kind of a voice within me that was like, call your
Mm.
dad. And I was like, no, universe, like, give me something bigger. This transformation thing is so cool. Having all these breakthroughs and it feels so amazing and euphoric when you have a breakthrough. And it was almost like the universe was like, no, call your dad. And I was like, okay. So I did call him one day and he was driving. He pulled over, I burst into tears and we, talked and cried. And then I flew over and went to see him. And that was the beginning of me rebuilding my relationship with my dad, which, I learned so much about myself. And I'm so glad that I did that, for the next 10 or so years. I just go and see him every year, sometimes a couple of times a year and just sit, talk and connect and get to know him and heal what needed to be healed. So that was kind of one of the first big things that I worked on. And then obviously there was a lot within me, like, I didn't realize I was very good at building walls and just shutting people out like I did with him. And so I had to work on that. I had to work on like chipping away at my wall. And here I was trying to build a yoga community. And if I was walled up, there is going to be no connection with me and my students and my community. I can't build something from not being able to create connection with the people around me.
Mm.
So there you go.
When you reconnected with your dad, well, when you heard that voice that from inside saying, "Call your dad," do you feel like you'd done enough work to be able to hold space for your dad as well, to hold space for that
No.
healing for you both?
No, I didn't even have an idea about holding space for him or me or whatever. It was literally just like, this is my work, as a
Um,
participant, as a student in the work. I was like, that's what I felt I needed to do because that was the thing I had resisted the most and
okay.
shut out of my life. So I wasn't calling him to like hold space for him. It was like, shit, I don't know what to do with this. And, I have to call you and let's have to see where it goes basically and start the
Mm.
healing process.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, no
Um,
worries.
I want to talk about living up to your full potential. What does that mean for you? What does that look like?
I certainly don't think I'm living in my full potential yet. I don't know if I will ever get there.
So do you see it so this is how I see potential, that it's always got a possibility, so it's infinite, if you like.
Yeah, I would agree. And in the work that I do, one of the things I do this 3-day event called Awaken, and the intention of that program is to clear out what's in the way and connect with your highest potential in this lifetime, your infinite potential within. So each of us have that and our version of that and speak to us in in its own way. Living in our full potential, my personal experience of it is that it keeps evolving. So, it's not
Yeah.
like a fixed thing. And as I've connected with it more and more, it has just, it's been a journey. It's guided me. And
Mm.
it came to me some years ago in one of the programs that I was doing as a student, as a participant. And my intention, reason why is to open hearts, awaken minds. And it came to me, it was quite a cathartic experience. And since then, everything I've done has been aligned, to that, to my why.
Mm.
So, that is me kind of living out my potential. And it took many different forms, from teaching yoga classes to all the things that I do. It just all aligns with that.
So that leads on to the next question. So, in terms of opening hearts and awakening minds, what happens first? The open mind or the open heart?
That's that's interesting. I've never actually seen it as like one first and the other. But if I was to choose, if I was to just answer the question, I would say the head first, because people are just so much in their heads. I
Mm.
say people, me too, right? Like we're in a time where there's so much distraction, there's so much vying for our attention that if you don't, I just don't know how, if people don't have the foundational practices like meditation or movement practice like yoga, which brings awareness, how they can actually direct their awareness. You're literally just at the mercy of, well,
Mhm.
devices, but also just all the distractions, in our day to day. And it's never end, it's non-stop all the time. So I can talk about opening hearts, but most of the time I'll meet someone just like I was, very much in their heads, very logical, needs
Mhm.
facts and figures and proof and science. And the things I'm talking about is not always scientifically proven, or it's not like I don't have numbers for it, but some part of them understands it and they come to it because, just like I did, that I just had this, I guess, feeling inside of me that there's got to be more to it, than whatever
Mm.
the scientific facts and figures. There's only so much we can explain with science, and obviously I love science. I'm not against it.
Yeah, I would agree with you as well about the head first, because you have to be open that there's something more. I think I've been doing some work myself. So Reiki trained and also yoga trained, and so I've done quite a lot of work around the chakra system over the years, and it's something I've been thinking a lot about around how what we hold in our hearts is expressed and seen and understood up here in your upper chakras, but then the work to get to that heart. So what you hold in that heart, it has to have some foundation, which is like your lower chakras, right? So, like what's in your heart, rooted in your rooted in your root, rooted in your root chakra, and or seeded in the root chakra. But then you need that support from the sacral and the solar plexus to give you that power, that confidence to work with the heart. I don't even know if that makes sense. It's just something I wrote
Yeah, it
down,
does.
like
Yeah, it
in a
does.
notebook. But so yeah, and in terms of so you're helping people in terms of their possibility, potential, purpose. So how purpose found you or you found purpose?
My experience of discovering or connecting with my purpose has been to give space. And it sounds like a bit of a cop out answer. But when I was leaving corporate, for example, I spent like 2 years in that last job I had not knowing what it is that I wanted to do. The yoga thing, I was just practicing a lot of yoga at that time. The yoga studio down my road, I was there all the time. And it was my teacher. I just did the yoga teacher training for fun. And my teacher, who is now a friend of mine as well, he was like, you should think of doing something like this, building something like this in London. And I was like, nah, I just laughed it off. And I was like, no, I'm just going to move to London, do the corporate thing and whatever, save some money and come back and buy a house, whatever, at that
Mm.
time. But then, he kind of planted the seed. And I was like, yeah, actually, why not? And then I got to Europe, traveled around for about 6 months and practicing yoga every day and refused to teach my friends, but they would just turn up anyway and brought their friends. And eventually I had no way to practice, so I had to actually teach them. And so it found me. And I think for me, it came from giving it some space, giving it some time and space for me to discover that, or I guess you could say for the noise around me and in my head, for me to turn the volume down on those a little bit so that I can actually hear what, my heart or my intuition or whatever you want to call it, was trying to guide me to, or life was trying to guide me to.
I think something that's really telling is, do you think you could ever give it up, or do you just think it's just something that's just so rooted and grounded that you couldn't?
My why, you mean?
Yeah, your purpose. Yeah, like your purpose
My
and
purpose.
yeah.
I think I'm very connected to my why as I've been living it out at least now for 20 years, coming to 20 years, since I moved to London and started to build, what was my yoga studio and then into what I'm doing now. I'm not fixed on it. I think from my experience of working with people and helping them, discover their purpose, it can change. Sometimes we put all these rules, we make things up in our head as if it's real. Like, I don't know what the truth is. It's just my observation of what happens, with people. And sometimes they get to a certain point, a few years in, and they go, "Oh, I have this other thing that I would like to explore and pursue, or my purpose is changing into something else. Is that okay?" And it's like, you don't need my permission. I think so. It's okay that it can actually evolve. I don't think, we're fixed in how we are as a human being. We're constantly evolving, changing. Life is constantly moving and changing as well. And being prescriptive and, sticking to one way, I think just causes us suffering.
And that's something that you talk about a lot, isn't it, in terms of the metamorphosis of our path, or the way how we live. Can you explain a little bit more about that? I suppose you have really, but is there anything more to say in terms of that? Because we are transient beings, aren't we? And I think when we're preparing the questions, I was thinking there is so much pressure, or it feels like there's so much pressure, particularly for our younger generations, to have it all figured out. I don't actually see anyone telling them that actually through your 30s, through your 40s, and probably for the rest of your life, you will evolve and change.
I don't think anyone knows what they're doing. We're all just fumbling around trying to work it out. Even the people who look like they've got this, their shit sorted basically. And they're like, this person knows what they're doing. They don't. And, I remember when I was in uni, when I chose my computing science degree, and it was difficult because I'm probably, not your most natural programmer type person. But we're learning all sorts of things around that field. And what I saw was like within the first year, I don't know how many hundred people in the university, in all, like even just in my course, people were just coming and going and just chopping and changing all the time, sometimes into second year and later on. And I could see, there was just so much pressure to know what you, want to do even before, you got to university. I had my dad, conversations with my dad where he wanted me to go to India and study and be a medical doctor. And I was like, no way in hell. I'm going to be doing that. And so he's like, what do you want to do? I was like, I don't know. And I was like, I'm good at math, so maybe that computing thing, I'll just go and do that and just see what happens. But it's a very expensive see what happens, go and just see what happens. What I've realized, as you just said, into my 20s, 30s, 40s now, no one really knows what they're doing. And even like you could choose to run a business and people are always changing their businesses. Today they're doing this, next day they're doing that, next day they're doing that. And I think you've got to just get up and choose that day to go spend one more day in that thing and recommit. If you're waiting for it to all like feel all nice and great and easy, it's not going to, because that's not how life works. And I don't think life is working against us. Life is just like a stream that flows in a certain trajectory and a force. And you either can jump in and flow with it, or you can try and swim against it and fight it. But it's not trying to get you, or it's not against you or anything like that, which like we make all these things up. It's just life has a certain flow, and a force to it. So there's going to be challenges because when you jump into the current, you're going to get like thrown around and trying to swim. And if you want to use that analogy, And in trying to create something that doesn't exist yet, to like creating business, for example, you're bringing into life something that doesn't exist yet. So it's going to require, at least in my experience, a tremendous amount of focus and commitment and attention brought to building it despite whatever difficulties. And it certainly has a lot of difficulties, as I'm sure any business owner can tell you.
Can I ask you what the most challenging thing has been, would you say?
With business, you mean?
Yeah.
Now I can laugh, I can look back and laugh. But one of the most challenging, I was building my yoga studio, I think probably about 3 or so years in. So within the first few months of me, at the time I was just hiring some rooms here and there, and I had a couple of heaters. I was teaching kind of heated yoga, run around with my heaters. My students had the timetable, so they knew Mondays here, Tuesdays there, Wednesdays there. Eventually they were like, I think we need a space. So I found this space in this business center and hired just this like, well, upstairs, downstairs, tiny little rooms. And then, we moved to, as I was about to move, they were like, oh, we've got this other space. So I ended up taking that. At the beginning, when I was about to give up, I had this vision. When I was asking myself, why am I doing this? I had this vision and I saw there was like 80 to 100 people in a room. And at that time, yoga was so weird that you can't even imagine. America, yeah, sure. Like they would have yoga rooms with like 100 people in them. But I was like, that would be so amazing. The energy in the room and the people and all moving together. And I'd love to build that someday. Who knows how long it's going to take, maybe 10 years or more. But maybe I can build something like that here. Within 3 years, the second studio that I moved into, we took one space and then the neighbor moved out. So I took the other space, we cut the wall out and we opened it up. And I remember there was one Monday when I was standing in front of the room, there was like 93 people in the room. And I had to pinch myself because I thought, hang on, is this real? Like, am I dreaming this? As if, the pinch test is the test for real. Pinch myself and I'm like, shit, I think, this is real. Like this community, this is what I saw in my vision. And as quickly as it kind of built, we used to basically have to do crowd control. Suddenly, while yoga was still weird, suddenly we had, the studio in Clapham and there's literally a crowd going, we're upstairs, around, down the stairs and down to the street. So I would see that on the booking system. I was 5 minutes away, jump on my bicycle, run up there and just like do crowd control. Like anyone who's new, go this way. Anyone who's been before, go that way. And we had like 2 queues coming down the stairs. And I think my neighbors were like, what the hell are they doing up there? Why is there 100 people coming in for each class every evening? As quickly as it built, and you could say like what looked like it blew up very quickly, I also lost that, studio very quickly because my neighbors, I mean, fair enough to them, but the floor wasn't really built to hold 100 people, each class. And we were doing like 4 or 5 classes a day. The evening classes were busy. The daytime classes were not that busy. But, downstairs, there was a sound recording studio, like a music recording studio. And then next to him, there was a retail, like scuba shop selling scuba gear. And they just kicked off because basically the ceilings would rattle, their lights would be rattling, the window, they're like, what the hell are you doing up there? And they managed to actually get us kicked out of the venue. And it was a very difficult position to be because at the time the council didn't understand what yoga studios were. So they put it just fell under I don't know, just the last thing that they could think of, which was the same as the nightclub and community halls and sports centers, that kind of categorization. It's now got its own category, but back then it didn't. So when I went to council and trying to look for buildings where I was trying to get commercial leases, put in our planning application, it would always just, they would drag it on for months, sometimes a year, and then just like say no, basically reject it. So I was in this like loop of fighting to keep my studio alive. And because it fell under nightclub categorization, I ended up just going down to the local nightclub on the high street, doing a deal with like those wheeler dealer dudes, got the VIP club up the thing upstairs, and we had like high street presence for 3.5 months, but we were in a freaking nightclub. That was one of the hardest things I've had to do because overnight my studio, my community grew and, we had members. And in that 3.5 months that we were in a nightclub before we found our next studio, we lost about 2/3 of our member base. And I was there every day fielding questions with my customers, and they were kicking off, obviously, because they were like, what the hell are we doing in this nightclub? But fighting commercial landlords and neighbors and councils is really tough. It's really, really tough. And I just refused to give up. And I just kept fighting for my community. And eventually, I did a deal with a friend of mine who had another smaller studio down the road. We took that space. And over the next few years, we quadrupled our business and took it just to
Right.
short of £1 million. So in a way, it was a blessing, but it was really tough. It was tough dealing with
Yeah.
that time, like having to answer because I didn't have an answer, for my community at that time. It's like, what the hell are we doing this nightclub? What happened to our studio?
Yeah. And just go back, the question you were saying that it was like nightclub status. Is that because of your numbers that you had in your class? Is that why it was classed as like a nightclub
No, the
in
council
the
doesn't
plan?
understand. Yeah, the
Right.
council planning permission, the planners didn't understand what a yoga studio was because yoga didn't exist before. So yoga studio would just fall right down the category. If you look at all the classifications, D was the last. So D2, same as a nightclub and a community hall. Here you go, we'll just chuck it in there. Yoga studios didn't really exist. So it was few and far between.
Yeah. Wow. Do you still have your studio in London?
No, I stepped away
No.
from it some years ago.
So if we just talk about your experiences with yoga, we go back to your yoga journey. And when you first started off in your martial arts, when you first went to martial arts and then you moved into yoga, did yoga give you something that the martial arts didn't?
Yeah, so for my martial arts, because I was competing professionally, I had injuries. So I torn both my hamstrings, injured my knees and my lower back as well. And I guess one thing, we were not doing, of course, we were doing lots of stretches and all that sort of stuff. But, had I had yoga to complement my martial arts, I was actually just saying to one of my old friends last night when I met him, I think it would have just been a very different game for me. It would just be
Okay.
such a superpower to have that. But I didn't have access to it. I didn't know about yoga back then when I was a martial artist. It was much later when I moved to Australia. Then I started to seek out, I wanted to do something that I could stay fit and healthy with, but it would give me enough of a workout, but also I can heal my injuries basically. So it was just, I was testing it out. And back then, my very first yoga class was an Ashtanga yoga class. When I went to it, I just got hooked straight away. It was, freaking amazing. I left the class feeling on top of the world. And I was like, I am going back to this every day. This is amazing.
And you said around the martial arts that it supported you with that sense of belonging as well. So so what I want to say about this is I also think a lot of our human experiences are transient, where we often consider them fixed. So, like in the outside world, like things like belonging and safety, that they're fixed elements, but actually they're very transient in nature, aren't they? So, what I thought was really interesting with you finding a sense of belonging in the martial arts, did that come first before you found a sense of belonging in yourself? Because I think it's around when our sense of belonging is off, that we need to anchor into something else first before we can do it for ourselves. Does that resonate with you, do you think, or is there something other?
Mm. I think my experience was different because, I got into martial arts as a child, at the age of 7. It gave me things that I'm just so grateful for. I think it's a wonderful thing to have, a child go into martial arts, especially in an environment that really supports them. I had an amazing instructor and I'm still in touch with him actually. He still trains. He trains children, but he still trains and he's super fit. And I just have so much respect for him because he's so good with children and he kind of helped shape me and he saw something in me and he registered me for my very first competition where I got scouted, one goal, and then I got scouted for national in that competition at the age of like 12, 13. Martial arts gave me a tremendous amount. It taught me about focus. It taught me about perseverance at a very young age when I just had no idea about anything as a child. It gave me confidence because the kids that were beating me up, when I moved schools, it was never an issue again. And when it was, I knew how to protect myself. I could take down 10 double the size kids. It happened and they would never try it again. And still, I think till today, I think un, without even kind of meaning to, it's allows me to carry myself in a certain way, my posture and how I breathe and how I move through the world. So I think it's amazing. And yoga then, it's another dimensions, not just one dimension, but multi-dimension that came together. So I'm trying to remember your question right now.
I think it was about finding a sense of belonging
Belonging.
outside of you, first
Yeah.
before finding it in yourself.
So I think in oh, okay, thank you for that. In it teaching me focus and all of that, it was a meditative practice. The hours of training that I was going for almost every day, actually, especially when I was on the team, definitely every day, sometimes twice a day we'll be training. It's many hours of being involved in discipline, and you have a lot of time not to think, but it develops your awareness beyond thinking. So the belonging, I think it showed me a belonging to myself without having to attach to the sport or anything else, or my teachers, or of course, like my friends in the community and all of that. But without me realizing it now in hindsight, when I look back, it gave me a sense of self, which then yoga developed even further. So perhaps because of that, and I haven't thought about it too much, but to me, that perhaps because of that, I can be anywhere in the world, traveling, or just go and teach somewhere else. And I always feel there's very few places that I've not felt at home. And I think it's because I feel at home in myself, and definitely over the years, I've become more and more comfortable in myself that there's a sense, I guess, it's a sense of belonging. I've never really sat and thought about belonging or not belonging. I've moved, as you said, moving from east to west is a huge move because such a cultural shift from, the Eastern culture and stepping, into a Western country. I was born and spoke English since I was born, but still language, culture, everything's different, in how we think. So there's many different changes like that I've had. But I think what's helped now thinking about when you're talking about this topic of belonging, having this sense of self and not needing to attach to anyone or anything else has allowed me just to navigate life. And I think that's something that we can all develop. It's there, but we tend to want to attach to other things which are transient. And then when
Yeah.
that thing goes, then we're like, oh shit, I've lost my sense of belonging.
Yeah.
But actually, it never belonged to that thing outside or person outside.
Thank you. So, what are your hopes and plans for the future? What are you working on? And
Yeah. So I'm going to continue what I'm doing and continue to build what I'm building, which is, deep transformational work, the work that I'm doing right now, really. So it's a combination of yoga, meditation, deep inner work, and, healing work, energy work. And in those four modalities I bring together. And the main thing I do is, a year long program. And we've just had our fourth year cohort. Some people have actually stayed for 4 years because it's just transformed their life so much. I love it. I love what I'm doing. And I'm just going to keep pouring energy into that until, I feel like I've been guided to something else, whatever that might be, or maybe it might be nothing else. And this is it for me to just continue pursuing. I'm deeply passionate. I love, watching people come in as one person with the things that they're carrying, and whether they leave within a certain time or not, by a certain point in time, they're almost like a different person. Not that who they were was different, was wrong, but it's just that they've grown into more of themselves. And talk about belonging, more of a sense of self and their potential, which we talked about before as well, and living from their potential and starting to realize it. It's extremely rewarding to facilitate that process and watch people's journey just unfold. It's actually quite addictive, I would say, hopefully in a good way.
oh, Dylan, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and talking to me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
That was another great conversation on the connection compass with Dylan. When I listen back to the episodes, I really took to heart some key points that Dylan said. So I really like that he said that he doesn't think we know what we are doing and that we're all just fumbling around. And I felt like that there was a pressure taken off, that we don't all know where we're going. Where with some days we just put one foot in front of the other and we take the opportunities that are standing in front of us, or, we might decide that something isn't right for us because it doesn't feel good. But ultimately, we don't know how things are going to work out. We just have to try our best and put our efforts in and our focus. And the other thing that really stuck with me was the reminder that when we are trying to create something that doesn't exist yet, that it is actually really, really hard, and it needs a lot of dedication and focus and determination to push through. And I know for myself, and when I've been putting together the work of the Connection Compass framework, that there have been days where I have spent hours and hours and hours and hours working on something and thinking I've got it and it's time to push things through. And then in the blink of an eye, it just all falls apart. And the sense of loss that you feel and that exasperation, that at some point you have to pick yourself up again and keep going. Keep leaning into that focus, that determination, that motivation. And also, something that Dylan said was that life is like a stream, and when we engage in it, because it flows, there are going to be challenges, there are going to be obstacles. Sometimes we're really thrown around, and I suppose it's learning to just ride with it, just flow with it. To find out more about Dylan's work, please check the show notes. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of The Connection Compass. If you think this episode will help somebody else, please leave a review. And remember to keep talking, keep connecting for a more interconnected world.